Hey everybody, Happy New Year. I hope you had a wonderful New Year's Eve and a stress-free New Year's Day. I wanted to put out a quick little bonus video just to keep you guys satisfied. It's not very quick now, is it? I noticed that I had these Discord voice messages lying around. I recorded them around 4 months ago. My thoughts have changed, primarily on the matter of copyright's validity. I lean more towards the side of disregarding copyright as a concept altogether. And this conversation that you're about to listen to was certainly instrumental in that. And secondly, I also wanted to point out that I've always believed in Mathean priority, and whenever you hear me mention that Mark wrote first, that's just me going off of like the scholarly consensus. That doesn't reflect my opinion. I wanted to clear those things up because it's going to be talked about a lot. Just to be clear, these are Discord voice messages. You are going to hear some background noise, and it's not going to be as structured as any of my other videos. So, without further ado, here is my little TED talk on the matter of copyright and why it's stupid.
So I was thinking about a few things when I was like driving back home for like the past 40 minutes or so, and I was listening to this video about this new mod for Fallout 4 called Fallout London, and it got me thinking about a few things: fair use, copyright infringement, mods, fan games, overhauls, etc. Um, so I don't know where to start, but I guess I'll start with this, right? There was this comment made in the video that if Bethesda acknowledges Fallout London as again, this is a mod that you put on top of the game that you already own, that this could cause IP lawyers to get on the case, to get on like the modders case, right? This is a professional mod team, and there's this question about like what if Bethesda isn't acknowledging they're aware of the team's existence because they've been coaching their programmers to work at Bethesda themselves, but like it seems as though they're not recognizing them, and the one of the excuses being given is that it's because IP lawyers, as soon as Bethesda officially acknowledges this game, that IP lawyers will be forced to sort of come down on them. And this got me thinking. So fair use, right? We have fair use for books, citations, for example. We have fair use for movies, video games, or specifically like footage, right? Like footage from movies, video games, TV shows, you name it, right? Other videos. There's fair use laws in place. But then my question is, like, why doesn't that apply? Why isn't there like fair use laws for intellectual property generally? Like, if I can show a movie, if I can show a movie of or show like a clip from, I don't know, Avengers Infinity War, right? And I could show like a 30-second clip of that in my video as B-roll footage when I'm talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And that's considered fair use, namely because it's transformative. And it's also not uploading the entire movie, right? You're using a sizable chunk for a particular purpose, and that purpose is transformative. So you're not really ripping off the intellectual property, right? You're not ripping off the usage of the IP just to like put it up on YouTube, right? So given that, right, why don't we have the same thing for intellectual property generally, or like, for example, fan games, right? There's two types of fan games. One of them I understand why they're not tolerated, but the other one gets me, right? And that is like the first one, the not tolerable ones are like stuff like, for example, Pokemon Clover, an edgy Pokemon fan game that's built on top of Pokemon Fire Red. It's a ROM hack, right? And I understand why this one is not really tolerated, not just because of the image, but because of the fact that every time you distribute this file, you're essentially distributing Pokemon Fire Red, and I mean, you're literally just that's just literally like it's just file sharing, like straight up a full version. So if there's any legitimacy to copyright as a concept, then obviously that's wrong, right? But there's this other type of fan game, for example, AM2R, right? Another Metroid 2 remake, or let's go with that, right? Which is like totally separate, built on its own engine, or maybe some other engine that belongs like Unreal Engine, a Unity, something public access, right? It's built on like a separate engine. It's not using any of the original assets. All it's using is characters. But I mean, it's basically like remaking the game, right? And you're thinking, well, you're still taking a lot, right? Okay, fine. How about I make my own darned Pokemon game? And the only thing that's similar is that like I have the name Pokemon attached to it, right? Because I don't know, I'm a fan of Pokemon and I really like Pokemon and I want to make my own Pokemon game. So I make my own Pokemon game. It's got its own region, its own characters. There's like only maybe a couple, like a handful of recognizable faces, right? Well, why is that considered copyright infringement? Like I understand because it infringes on the right to copy. Like okay, fine, but like why is there no fair use clause for that? Like it's if you make your own Pokemon fan game, right? I I'd imagine it's transformative enough to warrant like a fair use clause, right? It's transformative. Like it's not just like taking Pokemon as an IP and then like just like just taking Pokemon, selling it, and like adding minuscule changes. No, it's transformative. You make your own three elemental starter Pokemon. You make your own friggin' Pokedex, your whole Pokemon roster, your whole region, everything. It's a whole thing. It's the whole shebang, right? You make that. Okay, now why is it that just because you use the IP title Pokemon, that there's like no case for fair use at all? Like the game gets struck down further. If the creation and I want to get into modding as well, but if the creation of fan games is copyright infringement on its own, then is a game publisher, let's say Bethesda, right? Somebody wants to make like from the ground up, they want to make their own Elder Scrolls game. Call it Elder Scrolls Elsewhere, which is like where the cat people come from. And they build it from the ground up, and it's a fan game. And Bethesda hasn't put out another Elder Scrolls since 2011 with Skyrim. They've resold Skyrim, but they haven't put out a new one aside from maybe like ESO, Elder Scrolls Online, which is like 2015, right? But they put out their own game, Elder Scrolls Elsewhere, and let's say that Bethesda, who is one of the most like fan community content friendly company out there, out of all of them, let's say that they approve. Is Bethesda complicit in encouraging copyright infringement? Are they participating in evil? Like, are they committing an evil deed by encouraging the fan game because they're encouraging copyright infringement? Because it seems to me like if there's no fair use clause that can save a creator from having their entire project that they've been working on taken down, if there's no fair use clause that defends them from that, then it seems like there should be likewise a sort of like it seems like it's out of the control of the people involved and how transformative or anything it is. If you're eliminating all factors that you would consider for keeping the game up uh, morally, then even if it is like transformative, right? It's like a totally new experience, right? But if you're removing all of the stuff around it that would allow it to stay up, even if a developer wants to take it down, it would it would follow to me that then there's no justification for the developer themselves approving of the game's creation, of the game's existence, right? Um, Another thing, like modding, is is modifying games wrong? Is it copyright infringement? Like, or what about putting out mods out there for people to download and install? It's not just you modifying your own game, right? There's this big mod pack that I downloaded for Skyrim once, and I had to delete it because it was huge. It's like 450 gigabytes worth of mods in Skyrim, and it's called Folio One. You can look it up. It's pretty cool, right? But it's 450 gigabytes of mods. Skyrim is like 20 gigabytes tops with all of the custom content. It's not a big game, but Folio One is 450 gigabytes worth of mods. Several times, one would recognize, several times larger than the original game. Okay, is is creating those mods morally wrong? Is that not copyright infringement because you're putting out content under the title of the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, right? And if that's not wrong, is publishing it wrong? Is that like okay, creating it, maybe it's not wrong, right? Publishing it, is it wrong? That's the thing that I was discussing just now. And let's say that publishing it isn't wrong. Okay, What about profiting from it? What about selling the mod? Is that wrong? Like, where does the line get crossed? Is it just a matter of money? Because that seems pretty consequentialist to me. That doesn't seem like the principled stance against piracy that I've seen from people in these circles. And right, his stance against piracy is very principled. Right, it's about the objective facts. It doesn't have to do with how much money is lost. Right, like is it just this consequentialist thing? Like, is it when money gets involved? Let's say that they put it out for free. Okay, does Bethesda have the right to tell them to stop distributing this mod? It's not even like there's cases where this is legitimate. Like somebody Pal World comes out and like day one somebody made a mod, swapping out all the Pal models and the player models for Pokemon models. Well, yeah, obviously you're just ripping models from the games and putting them out there. That's proprietary content. You can't distribute that. So yeah, take it down. Fine. But what if it's like I put out I put out a mod that just adds a chair that I modeled. I made the UVs for it. I textured it. I made it all nice and spiffy. I gave you custom sound effects if you sit down on it. I gave it functionality. I programmed it, right? I made that chair mod, and I put it out there, right? And it's under the title of this mod is for the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Is that wrong? Is that morally incorrect? If so, why? If not, then I don't see how you hold that standard while saying stuff that like fan games are wrong. Does Bethesda have the right to tell me stop posting this mod? And like the answer is it yes or is it no? Like is it more? Do they have the moral right to do that? And if they do, this concerns me because it seems like this is all based off of, first of all, I don't understand why we have to adhere to this like these concepts of copyright and all these like the specifics and like the details of how copyright and like intellectual property, how this all works. Like, I'm sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think Christians came up with that. I don't think the church came up with that. The church hasn't ruled on this, right? So like, are we just following the word of secular people about the morality of digital goods? Why? Like, why would we just take their word for it? Why can't we question that? The reason this concerns me is because doesn't that go against like a huge fundamental element of our faith, the Gospels? Hear me out. So, according to the most popular authorship theories, or hypotheses, rather, hypothesis, it's singular. Um, it was Mark wrote first, and then Matthew aped Mark and then added on top of it, and Luke did the same to Mark, right? This is the sort of hypothesis that goes around, is that you have Mark, and then Matthew took a huge set of things from Mark, plopped it into his own gospel, didn't cite it, didn't say I got this from somewhere else. He just put them in there, right? And and then he added on top of it. Does it sound like modding? More than that, doesn't that sound like, because it's not like Mark is like, well, I'm sorry, it's not like Matthew was like, Mark, I'll give you a cut for like the amount of stuff that I took from your book when I sell the gospel. Obviously they weren't sold, but like there was no like collaboration that we know of between Matthew and Mark to be like, yeah, this is like, we agree that you could we're never told that explicitly that Mark gave Matthew or Luke permission to do what they did, right? And I'm not condemning them, but correct me if I'm wrong. Is that not just plagiarism? Like if I'm writing an essay and I have like a 10 paragraph essay, and three or maybe even five of those paragraphs are just lifted from somebody else, and then I add on top of that, did I not still commit plagiarism? It would appear to me that, and I'm not saying plagiarism the sin, I'm not saying plagiarism the lazy habit, I'm not saying plagiarism the crime, I'm not saying plagiarism the academic offense. Just like in base terms, the way it looks to me, Matthew and Luke committed plagiarism, right? Like the blatant taking of somebody else's body of work, specifically literature, putting it into your own work, and publishing, and then you add on top of it, but you publish a book You put out there a book, whatever, right? You put it out there, you distribute the work. That's what I was looking for. You distribute the work containing a large chunk of somebody else's work, and you never credit them for it. As far as we know, you never credit them for it. The most we have is Luke saying that he got his information from witnesses, which is like the bare minimum of giving credit to anyone ever. So it concerns me, right? Because like if we're saying that something like there's no fair use clause for something like a ROM hack, right? Or something like maybe a fan game that takes a chunk of code from the original game that it's making a fan game of, you know? Like maybe you borrow some of the code from, I don't know, I'm going to keep using Pokemon because it's easy. Like Pokemon Sun and Moon for the 3DS, right? You take some of the code from Pokemon Sun and then you put it into your Pokemon fan game, right? But then you build on top of that. How is that not the same thing? I understand that the gospel writers didn't have this concept of copyright in their heads, right? But like, I don't know, the church hasn't decided on it, so it doesn't really seem like the church has had much of a concept of copyright in its head either, right? So like, in terms of what our faith is telling us, which is where we should derive our morals from, nothing's changed, right? So like, given that, right, are we to condemn Matthew and Luke, Saint Matthew and Saint Luke? Are we to condemn them for committing plagiarism and putting out a work that contains huge chunks of somebody else's work without citing him, without crediting him, without saying, "Hey, I got this from somebody else," without any of that? None of that. None of that. Right? Frankly, you could even put some of this on Saint Mark as well, because Saint Mark is, as far as we understand, he was Saint Peter's interpreter. It would seem that he got his information from him. That Peter is the primary source for Mark's gospel. But let's put that aside for now. Let's focus on Matthew and Luke. My concern is that by following the specifics and the details and like the presuppositions even of what copyright is, what intellectual property is as a concept in our day and age, it seems to me that we're like we should, if we're going to apply any of that morality retroactively, we would be condemning our saints. Not just our saints, like the creation of the foundation of our faith, the gospel. Like obviously I'm talking like the gospels, like the gospel according to, but like the books. But like that's where we know the gospel from. That's where we get, like, that's the main source for our understanding of the life, death, and resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ. Are we not condemning the creation process that brought these books about? John did his own thing, and as I mentioned, we'll leave Mark out of this for now. But half of these books, the larger chunk, by the way, at least in terms of chapters, like Mark is pretty straightforward to the point. It's short. It's the shortest gospel, 16 chapters. John is 21, if I'm not mistaken. And then, again, if I'm not mistaken, Matthew's 28 chapters long, and Luke is 24. So the larger body of like half of the gospels, that I know that mathematically makes no sense, but like half of our gospels and the uneven half of it, larger half of it, is like lifting. It's full of plagiarism, if you will. I don't see I don't see why, or rather, I don't see how we just take these presuppositions about intellectual property and copyright and plagiarism, and we like, if we retroactively apply these to the gospels and the creation process of the gospels, I don't see how we don't condemn them. I don't see how we don't like at least declare that some evil was done in the creation of the gospels. But that's wrong, obviously, right? You can't tell me that the gospels were created using an evil process, right? The gospel writers were wrong in the because like that sort of undermines the whole idea of that these books are sacred, right? That the Holy Spirit inspired these books. It's like the Holy Spirit is not going to inspire something evil. And I'd imagine that this would also apply to the creation process of these works. So that's what concerns me, really, is like, by applying these standards for copyright, we are putting ourselves in a bind where if we really want to be intellectually consistent, we have to then condemn the create and like I'm talking specifically like stuff like fan games, like either we condemn the creation of the Gospels, or maybe we just admit that there's room for fair use, right? That there's room for fair use. I think that that's the better option, and that maybe we shouldn't just say, well, yeah, game companies have all the right in the world to tell these fan game makers to buzz off, right? Okay, well, let me ask a hypothetical. Let's say that it wasn't Matthew or Luke. Let's say that it was somebody else, and it could be as simple as uh, the things that they added on top of Mark. Like let's like go from like worst to like the most excusable, right? So like the worst, they publish outright heresy on top of Mark's work. The gospel according to I don't know, Apollo or something, and not Apollo, the one mentioned in the Bible, just like some dude named Apollo, right? And the gospel according to Apollo is just Mark with like extra stuff added on, but it's false. It's like false information, false history, fairy tales, and lies, right? Does Mark have the right to tell him to take it down? I think morally, to stop him from spreading lies, that would be true. Okay. But like, what if the gospel according to Apollo, this guy, uh, you know, maybe it's not that he published lies or heresy or anything of the sort. What if, what if he just published something like that, something like Matthew, like what Matthew is to Mark, but Mark didn't like how Apollo worded things. He didn't like how he worded certain things. He didn't like the tone of how some things were said or written down, right? How some things are expressed. He didn't like the themes of the work, right? Okay, maybe he has a moral right to tell him to take it down because it might convey false information. What if he just doesn't like how Apollo dots his I's, right? What if he just doesn't want a competing version of his work out there? Right? Doesn't even matter that it contains like all truth. Let's grant that Apollo's work, somehow he's an apostle or like he's an eyewitness and he's everything that he's writing is true. Does Mark have the authority, or not the authority, like obviously like we would consider that Mark has some authority at least, but does Mark have like the moral right to tell him, hey, no, don't distribute that? Let's take it to the most logical extreme. Did Mark have the moral right to tell Matthew to retract his gospel? Did Mark have the moral right to tell Luke to retract his gospel? Because it's using his work as a base. And I'll end it with this. If you say that he does, I think there's an issue there. And if you say that he doesn't, then you might want to apply that stance to modern day creative works, such as modern day art, be it literature, video games, movies, television, you name it. And that's my rant for the afternoon. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.